We were the result of the First World War, with 3 million superfluous women. And, you see, the education that we had at school, it was sort of implied that it was your duty to use it for the benefit of the world. And there was no question in those days of having a job and being married and having children.
It was my mother's experience, mostly, and what I saw going on around me, other mothers, other people's houses that we visited, and the way they were run. I wasn't going to run a bourgeois house. Hadn't the slightest intention of doing any such thing, and never did. Never did at all.
Spinster. Well, of course, that's a very, very old-fashioned word. As you know, it comes from the girl who was left behind spinning in the corner. You know, that comes from very long ago days, long before my days, the word spinster comes. No, I don't know whether I've ever actually, not actually thought of myself in that term. I don't think so. But of course I am. Think of us, of the lost generation, brought about by the horrors of war. Think of the millions of husbands and lovers snatched to its hungry maw. Think of the girls who were never mothers, though they longed for a babe in their arms. Never to know the clasp of a lover on their wedding day and goodbye to mother. There is a letter my mother writes to her friend that her happiness was almost too great to be borne. With her dear, dear husband, her beautiful home, and I find this difficult to tell you almost without emotion, and then her baby lying under her heart. When I was just 5 weeks old, my mother died. I absolutely adored my father. He was mine, and he loved me, of course, intensely. All his love, really, was poured out to me. And as a very small child, in my cot, I can remember sitting bolt upright in the cot and holding on to the sides and keeping my eyes very wide open so that I shouldn't go to sleep before he came, and just listening. Key in the front door, umbrella going into the stand, hat going onto the stand, and then racing up the stairs. And then, of course, I leapt up in the cot and was gathered into his arms.
See, the parents had the call, and they made a big sacrifice, and they went out to preach to the heathen, but the sacrifice was also of the children. And my father used to comment, and presumably when I was born, that children ought to be born 3 years old, because they were no use to their father before then. A very different attitude from the present day, of course, where fathers are even present at the birth and feel a sense of responsibility for them all the way through. But the Victorian father didn't feel like that. I mean, it wasn't just my parents.
I know that my mother didn't have a bank account. She did not share it with my father. And that was typical of this kind of middle class that I belonged to, rather lower than upper. And I could see from her life that she was purely dependent. And when she wanted special things for children's clothes or whatnot, she had to ask for it, or skimp her own money in order to buy something, you see. So I found that appalling. I saw it at once. I mean, from early age I saw it, and I thought that was all wrong.
The very first serious housekeeper we had, the slightest thing that you didn't do at once, she would say, "Come here, take down your knickers." And then there was me unbuttoning the many buttons and getting the knickers down, and she'd snatch me across her lap and beat my bottom with a cane. And I can, telling you about that, I almost feel it now.
The day after my 7th birthday in January, Father and Mother went back to India. We went to Sevenoaks Station to see them off, and the guard blew the whistle, slammed the door, and the train moved slowly out. And it struck me then tremendously forcibly, so much so that I can remember it even if I go through Sevenoaks Station now. I get the feeling of it. But they're going out and leaving me behind. Of course, I knew they were, in a way, but I ran after the train as fast as I could. And that was the beginning of my really traumatic experiences, I think, at school. We had Bible pictures by the beds, and there was Daniel in the lion's den, and the woman sweeping her lost silver, and there was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the burning fiery furnace, and all these different ones. But by my bed was what I thought of as the lost sheep. I think probably it was called the Good Shepherd. But I was quite sure it was the lost sheep, and that I was this little lost sheep. It was all that kind of background which gave one a great sense of guilt. My friends who said they'd seen angels, and I thought, well, I'm not good enough to see an angel. And they said, oh, I saw an angel in my corner of my bedroom. Oh, well, you're lucky. I couldn't see an angel. No angel would come to see me.
Sing a song of women whose work is never done. Mum went out to be a maid, a little scullion. Met a neat young office clerk, boater on his head, shilling on a table, mangle and a bed. Mum in a mob cap, Mum in Sunday coat, Mum making suet pud when women got the vote. I was going to be an astronomer at 14. And then I really wanted to be a doctor, and I did try very hard to be transferred from arts to medicine, but it wasn't possible. My science subjects were not good enough. I couldn't possibly have passed any entrance exam even, so it was out of the question. It was also 5 years. It was also very difficult for women to be trained in those days as doctors. I won a scholarship to Bedford College in London University, and I had a very inglorious time there because I hated it, and I got on very badly, and so I never took a degree, and I left with halfway through a course. And then, of course, I had to find a job, because my father's principles were that you had to stand on your own feet.
My one idea was when I grew up, I was going to be an actress, you see. But my father, of course, to be an actress was just one step to the streets. So, actress, of course you can't be an actress. For one thing, you're not strong enough. I hear him saying now. And no, certainly you're not going to be. You're going to business college, and you're going to become a secretary. It's a disaster for me. The whole thing was homework. Me adding up columns of figures, was too utterly awful. And then my poor father thought, what am I going to do with this girl? No doubt, he thought.
I was reading a book on careers for women, and in the one chapter was Elsie Fogarty of the Central School of Speech Training and Dramatic Art, Royal Albert Hall, Kensington Gore. So that made me think, now that's the sort of thing that I'd like to do. So I got Father's permission to go and see Miss Fogarty. He was very concerned because, of course, as a strict nonconformist, he'd never been to a theatre. He didn't approve of theatres. And when he thought that they were stage students at the Central School, he was very worried. And, of course, there were stage students there. When I went, there was Laurence Olivier, and there was John Murray, and a bit later Peggy Ashcroft, do you see, and Claire Bloom, and so on. I mean, if I'd been taking a stage course, I might have been in with them. And with Laurence Olivier, anyway.
But I'm not speaking of friendship, but of love. No, it's quite useless you're trying to put aside the word with a smile and a jest. I said love, and I mean love.
My little love affair? Yes. He was tall and dark and handsome. There's no nonsense about that. He really was. That's not, it's not a saying. He really was. And he did adore me. He used to write to me nearly every day. And all of a sudden, my father said to me, what are all these letters you keep having? You see. And so I said, well, they're my friend. He's in love with me, you see. So Dad said, let me see some of them. My dear, how innocent, when I think how innocent they were. It's nothing vulgar, nothing, well, to use today's overworked word, dear, there was nothing sexy about it at all. Nothing. I look back on it and think of the sweet innocence of all that. There's no doubt about it. But, of course, my father said, this is all nonsense. He said, what can you know about love? You don't know anything about love. You don't know what love means. Because I said, but I love him, Daddy. You see, I love him. Leonard said, oh, Mr. Butler, I want to ask you if I can take Mary out sometimes, you see. And so Dad went very quiet, and then he said, young man, come into the next room with me for a minute. So they went into the next room, and after a few moments, I heard the front door bang. Closed then. And Dad came back and said, I have told Leonard that you are far too young to start any of this sort of thing. And I want you to know, looking me very straight in the face, that all your kisses are mine for a very long time to come.
You're trembling. Why? No. Don't say it. I couldn't bear it. You're everything in the world to me. You know that. Without you, I should be quite alone. You know that, too. And if you love me, you can't be afraid of me, for love casts out fear. You love me, my darling. You love your father.
Yes.
And you will prove your love by doing as I wish.
At the school, I had Duncan and Willie and I don't know. We used to go out. We used to go to the library. Of course, that was the place. The library was open till 9 o'clock at night or something. But, of course, it was all during the war. And our parents didn't like us going out very much. It was dark, of course, no lights. And there might be a Zeppelin raid or something. But on the whole, my parents were very free and they didn't worry at all. And we used to meet at the library and have a little walk and so on. But nothing happened. We never even kissed. Never even kissed.
Of course, there was the most violent recruiting went on in the First World War. Men at every street corner saying, your king and country needs you, and stirring all the young men up. And of course, one lunchtime, out goes Ned, and the next thing he said he was older than he was, and he was in uniform, and off he went. And eventually went to France, and he was in the trenches on the Somme. He was looking out over the top and telling his friend the names of the wildflowers growing in no man's land. The order came to come out of the trench and rush across, you know, the Germans doing the same, rushing across and meeting each other and killing each other in the middle. And Ned had only been a few yards, a few steps almost, out of the trench when he was killed instantly. And, you know, truly the virgin soldiers, as they were called in those days.
The casualties were terrific. I mean, really terrible. The Second World War, probably there were as many civilian casualties as there were army ones. I don't know, with all the bombing. But in the First World War, whole villages were wiped out, the men and so on. Therefore, you just take it for granted that you wouldn't get married. There were too many women and not enough men to go round.
And he came one night, a pouring wet night. I got a streaming cold. I was feeling absolutely awful, with terribly still upset about Ned not coming back anymore. And I'm sure looking my utter worst in a grey velvet jumper trimmed with black round the neck. And anyway, in he came, looking absolutely marvellous by this time in officer's uniform. And my word, those young men did look smart and marvellous in those days. And it was absolutely dreadful, because he was hardly asked to sit down, let alone offered a drink or anything of that sort. At last, the boy, not knowing what to do, I suppose, he said, well, I'm afraid I must be going now, or something. And he got up, and Dad got up. I made to get up, but didn't exactly. And Dad just showed him out of the front door, and I was not allowed to be with him one moment. I thought, I did think about it after, but if I could only have told Len, if I could have only just told him, Len, I do still love you, because I did, my heart.
Oh, my child, don't think I haven't noticed that you two are slowly drawing away from your father.
That's not true.
It is true. New life, new interests, new pleasures, new friends, and little by little I'm being pushed into the background. I who used to be your whole world, I who loved you, who love you.
But
No, there's nothing more to be said.
was understood that Mary could sew very nicely. And all of a sudden, somebody in business said to him, "Oh, Mr. Butler, you've got a daughter. Would she like to be a milliner, do you think?" Oh, I adored being a milliner and had made the most wonderful hats. Can you imagine Ascot coming on and how we all worked like mad on these wonderful confections, you know? Oh, yes. I was at Madam Humphrey's in Bond Street, and we made the most wonderful hats for all the aristocracy and the actresses of the time. Here's a little summery one, sort of half summer, half winter. Quite becoming.
I put my name down with a thing called the Ladies' League. Frightfully posh, you see. And asked, they found you jobs, you see. A private place, of course. And they sent me to those people who look after feet. What is that? Shawl. Yes. Oh, there was going to be a brilliant future for me in shawls, but I had to start by working in the shop. And I said I couldn't do that, so I turned that away. And finally, much to my pleasure, I was invited to go and see Sir Bernard Pears, who was Professor of Russian, then stationed at King's College in London. He was very liberal in his outlook, not at all socialist by any means, but liberal, generally believed in women working. And he and I got on like wildfire, and so he appointed me.
I got more and more depressed, more and more unhappy. I really didn't feel that I could cope with doing any speech therapy. For some years I was just at home doing the housework, doing the cooking, running the family home, looking after my parents. My sister Dorothy, of course, was a psychiatrist. Therefore, you see, analysis was quite a sort of reasonable thing in our family, which other people perhaps wouldn't have thought of and known, but I decided I must have an analysis. Not a very complete one, not as many people, go on for years and so on, but about 9 months, 5 times a week is pretty severe. And when I was offered a job in Nottingham, I left home and went up and got a job there, do you see, because that made it possible. Without the analysis, I certainly wouldn't have.
I was really at the top of my profession by this time, except that I wasn't the designer, you see, but I would have gone on to be a designer. I know in my heart I would have done. And all of a sudden, my aunt in the country fell and broke her leg, slipped on a mat on a polished floor. And so a letter came from a friend of hers. Dad opened it at the breakfast table, and he said, "Good heavens, Kitty's has broken her leg." Turned to me and said, "Mary, you must go immediately. You must go down there immediately." So I said, what about business, Oh, can't worry about that. You see, it shows how little he thought of it, really. Of course, in these days, Aunt would have gone to hospital straight away, but there was no thought. The doctor said to me, "She won't last very long, he said. Anyway, we went forth, and Aunt did not go for many, many years, because she came to live with us afterwards. And I really practically had a breakdown, you see. I really did. I had that wretched sort of breakdown where you cried all the time. I couldn't stop crying. The tears were always running down my face. Of course, the millinery business was all over, you see, and everything. And I wanted a career. I wanted, something that was mine. I wanted to earn something. I knew in my heart that it would hurt Dad, but then at that time, you see, I desperately wanted to get away from home. I had the most wonderful time, because I adored children, you see, and children loved me too. And of course I knew the district. I used to take the walks, and the children absolutely adored my walks. I used to tell them stories all the time, and I could tell them all the names of the wildflowers and tell them what the trees were and where they were, and they absolutely loved it. And so I had a wonderful term, because it was a time of bliss, happiness, unimaginable. I was going to, I'll get another job, you see, I thought. As a matron in school, that was what I felt I was fitted for. And so I was sitting there about to answer another letter, and he sat behind his paper, taking no notice of me at all, And I looked down and said, "Dad, you don't want me to do this, do you?" And he said, "You know I don't." And I put everything away and forgot it. Little dream children who come at my call, will you always be dreams? Will that be all? Or some fine morning will love take your hands and lead you to me from the shadowlands? Mary Butler, 1923. I was thinking the other day, birth and death and everything all went on round you in the home. And, of course, I was with Aunt when she breathed her last. My father had a cerebral hemorrhage. I think it was practically the shock of the aunt going, And he realised he was the last. The other uncles had died, you see, as well. And he didn't even know me, which was terrible. He thought that I was a young man. And of course it was all dreadful because the Second World War came upon us then. You see, he'd no idea what was going on. He used to say, "What's that noise? What's all that noise?" And it was a battle going on over our heads. And of course I had to bath him. I had to get him into the bath, dress him, take him to the lavatory, do everything like that because he didn't know what he was doing. But you've got to, if things like that happen, you've got to jolly well brace yourself and get on with it. You really have. Or else you just go under, and they do too. I was all he got, you see. One's got to remember. He never got over my mother's death. I said to him once, "Oh, didn't you wish I'd died at the same time, And he said, no, never, never. He said, "I couldn't have borne to have lost everything." There was jealousy at the back of it somewhere, you see. He couldn't bear Len wanting to come and take me away from him. He didn't think far enough that he would have probably been a grandfather and then thoroughly enjoyed being a grandfather, because he could have done. He thought, I think, he would be utterly alone.
I remember quite clearly feeling when I was highly depressed, I could never bear to have a child because I could never bear a child to suffer as I was suffering. you know, to have a child of mine who was as miserable as that and that I couldn't do anything to help him or her. So that I really resigned myself in adolescence not to have a child. And then when I was grown up and I would have liked to have made contact and had somebody, somebody fall in love with me, I really never gave out the right signals. I was much too shy and withdrawn and difficult. I remember at the end of my analysis saying to the doctor as I went out, I shall get married now. And she said, don't be so sure. And that sort of made, well, perhaps I shan't after all. You know what I mean? I felt I've got state where I could get married. I've got rid of all my anxieties, or a lot of my anxieties and fears and so on. And the way she said, well, don't be so sure.
Did your parents want you to get married?
They never talked about it. It wasn't a subject of discussion. We didn't talk about that sort of thing. No. I wasn't brought up in that atmosphere. Most people are, I know, and that's why they do, and that's a damn silly thing. But if you don't bother the children about such silly subjects, then you don't have them discussed, and that was how it was in our family. We didn't talk about it. We talked about a working future all the time, independence. Sing a song of women whose work is never done, waiting still for equal pay, it's just begun. Earn a bit each morning, flick the dust till 3, scribble draft of novel and a note to my MP, me with a ponytail, me in overall, me frying frozen cod, Karl Marx up on the wall. I had one major affair in the 30s, very major and very important to me, because it was again with somebody whose philosophical outlook by that time, whose philosophical outlook was equivalent to mine at that time. And I found that it was the most rewarding experience, which has lasted all my life, actually. So few people go and vote in these local elections. It's completely unrepresentative, because only 30% less, perhaps, actually vote in any of the council elections, whether they're a town. From my point of view, and from the point of view of people of my generation and my upbringing and beliefs, the modern situation is absolutely appalling. It really is devastating. The fact that everybody says that socialism is dead, and it isn't, of course. We know it isn't, but it's a whole life's work, a whole life's beliefs down the drain, if they talk like that. And the world now, under the present government, is going back to Victorian times. It's not anything that we ought to be doing. It's dirty and nasty and something that we ought to be fighting. Everybody ought to fight it. However, we don't. So there it is.
And down, and up in those days, then come up, and then come up, get ready to sleep, and up, and left reach and back, to right, to left, to right reach and back.
So they picked up the threads and packed away thoughts of a life that is bright and gay, and set to work to make what they could of the life before them and make it good. So think of those of the lost generation and pray against war and its cruel devastation. after my father had died and I was sort of, how shall I put it, free then, you know, in a way, I did have quite a fair amount of difficulty with, as I have put it lately, beating off married men, you know, who wanted to make... I could have, like a lot of youngsters today, I could have hopped into bed with a good number of married men, you know. But that wasn't me. I would never have been happy at all doing that sort of thing.
One time, apropos of that, is rather funny. You know, all these things you have, Dateline and whatnot nowadays, which I read and think, well, I fancy that, you know. You read columns of people putting themselves... But I did once, I wonder how old I was, 30-ish or a bit more. I sent on one of these things, you know, in plain envelope of how to attract men. And I was so disgusted with all the things that I was supposed to do. I just sat and laughed about it all, but, you know, paid 30 shillings or something for all this information. I mean, one always hoped to see a stranger, find somebody somewhere. On holiday, you went off, you know, hopeful that you might, but of course you never did. And also, of course, to have been picked out, loved enough to have been asked to marry somebody, which nobody ever did. He was married anyway, you see, the man who gave me that thing. So there's no question of breaking up his marriage, though he was fond of me. Feel, well, you lost out on it, which should be everybody's experience, to find somebody. I've thought I was in love. I've been very unhappy and very jealous of somebody else who was, you know, more friendly with the man that I thought I was in love with, but I've never really been in love to the state of wanting to marry that particular person. But I've been in love with the idea of love, of course.
Oh, yes, dear, I'm just the sort of woman who... Just the very sort of woman who wanted to be somebody's mum and have children. Of course, I would have loved to have been married and had an ordinary... Just I didn't want much, but I would like to have been just an ordinary mum with somebody to love me and children round me that I could love. Of course I would. Yes.
Sadly, since tonight's programme was made, Dorothy Galton has died.
Jockeys.